Hello and welcome to One and All. Thank you for taking the time to join this month's conversation here on The Global in the Granite State, a program of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. As always, my name is Tim Horgan, and I am your host and the Executive Director of the Council. What a wild ride it has been, and I appreciate all the ways you support our community-funded nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We cannot shape the global conversation without your support and engagement. Thank you to everyone who is already a member or donor. If you have not had the chance to support our important work, please hop over to wacnh.org to see how you can get more involved. A special thank you to our long-term series sponsor, McLean Middleton, for their leadership. I appreciate the critical funding you provide to help make this possible. McLean Middleton is one of New England's premier full-service law firms with over 115 attorneys throughout offices in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. McLean Middleton's attorneys have been providing trusted legal services to businesses throughout the region for over 100 years. Learn more at mclean.com. Now, on with the show. Since at least the start of the Industrial Revolution, the drive to secure energy resources has been a critical goal of all governments. Without reliable access to these resources, economic development stalls, poverty increases, and governments fall. Energy has been used as a weapon of war, as well as the cause of various conflicts, as countries have tried to gain advantages over others. We are seeing the use of energy as a weapon play out today with the ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz, designed to choke off 20% of global oil supplies in response to attacks on Iran. However, oil and natural gas are not the only products impacted, as jet fuel, diesel, ammonia, aluminum, and helium all pass through the strait in large quantities. For an immediate impact on the United States, look no further than the failure of Spirit Airlines, which was already on shaky ground before 20% of the global supply of jet fuel was taken off the market. This drove up global prices to an unsustainable level for this company, which ended up disappearing overnight. However, there is a much bigger story here, as the world continues to look for new sources of energy and storage that will allow countries and companies to diversify and strengthen their energy security.
The first thing that I teach in my energy policy classes is there is no silver bullet energy solution. There's no energy out there that's going to solve all our problems. Every energy system has problems, concerns, issues.
That is Stephen Bird, the director of the Carsey School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire. He has spent his career examining all aspects of energy policy and regulation, with a particular focus on energy conflict, polarization, and the transition away from fossil fuels.
But there are really significant drawbacks. If we're looking at the best, most emergent, most dominant growth in energy today, it's in solar, every kind, rooftop solar, large-scale utility solar. But there's enormous issues with the amount of distribution systems you need for solar, the fact that you still need battery systems, and battery systems have their own problems and concerns for safety. By the way, you need an awful lot of land that you cover with solar panels to develop large-scale utility-based solar. And if you're not doing that thoughtfully and carefully, you are doing it in ways that are going to be very harmful to ecosystems in the same way that strip mining coal was. Not in the same way, obviously, but in different but as concerning ways.
However, before we move into the future of the energy transition, the thing that is top of mind for most people these days is the price of gas. Of course, there are a lot of factors that affect the price of gas and oil, but one of the biggest drivers is the ongoing conflict in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This is actually one of the reasons I wanted to host this conversation, as I have seen many questions online about why the United States should care about the strait when U.S. companies produce enough oil and gas to meet the needs of the entire nation. Despite this, gasoline prices continue to push towards a $5 per gallon average nationwide and are even higher in other parts of the world. There are several reasons at play here.
If we're thinking about markets in any given country, as a general rule, most of the time when we're talking about gasoline, but also oil and gas more broadly, and we want to differentiate between gas as gasoline, as in car transportation, diesel fuel, et cetera, versus natural gas, which we use for heating and cooking. Both are part of a global market. In there, the big challenge is it is a global market, indeed. And so prices are set at a global level. And when you have fewer resources of any given good globally, it's going to affect prices here. And one might say, okay, well, it doesn't matter. We have as much oil and gas as we need here in the US. But there's actually two problems with that. One is a fairly major change enacted by the Trump administration in his first term, which opened up US natural gas and oil markets, oil to make gas, to global markets for export. And that had previously been limited and or constrained precisely for the reasons of energy security that went all the way back to the 1973 oil crisis. And the challenge there is that has been extraordinarily good for US oil and gas companies that now get to sell to a larger market. But for the American consumer, it means we are now vulnerable to global oil and gas prices as opposed to a constrained US energy market only. But even before then, the other thing to remember about oil and gas markets is that they are very much constrained and impacted by supply chains. And the supply chain nodes and components and aspects of supply chains, the way they work in the US, really mitigates and moderates prices that you see. And so we have places that do not have access to natural gas whatsoever, simply because there's not local pipelines and distribution lines for those markets, even here in the Northeast, which puts people onto either oil markets. I'm heating my house with oil or propane, that sort of thing, things that can be moved around on trucks more easily. And so those domestic supply chains also impact our pricing quite a bit. And so that's why you see huge variations in gasoline prices, the price you pay at the pump for your car between Texas to California. It's also affected by state level regulation and state level taxes, et cetera. And so our prices are really, I like to think of it as not actually a global market or a domestic market. It's a hybrid market. But it's now a hybrid market that has more exposure to the global prices. And that's certainly been driving all of the challenges that people have been seeing.
On top of all of this, the war in Ukraine continues to strain oil and gas markets, while the increase of supply from Venezuela has done little to offset the 20 million barrels per day lost on the global market by Iran's blockade. This has led to several attempts to mitigate the impact on consumers, both here, at home, and around the world, including the largest release of petroleum from strategic reserves, export restrictions, direct government payments, and calls to conserve all forms of oil derivatives for fuels. The United States has even relaxed some of the sanctions it placed on Russian exports of oil and gas in response to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Speaking of Ukraine,
the Russian-Ukraine war disrupted world energy markets really significantly. Europe is over-dependent, as they quickly found out, on Russian gas, which is used to run electricity plants in Germany and to heat people's homes across most of Europe. It was a very harsh reality that they found. And what's been interesting about both Ukraine and Iran is what's emerged is what I think of as almost like a double-edged sword. In the short term, it's driven some quick, we got to do something, right? Like people need to cook their dinner and all that sort of piece. And so it drove some short-term reversion back to fossil fuels in ways that many countries, particularly Europe, which was on the bleeding edge of the clean energy revolution, and it moved them back onto coal-fired power and a few other things. But at the same time, it redoubled people's efforts into saying, oh my Lord, we cannot be dependent on Russian gas, and to diversifying their markets and to, as quickly as possible, work towards and think through renewable energy systems, which typically are domestic. You develop your own wind, your own solar, your own geothermal.
However, as Stephen previously stated, these energy sources are no silver bullet, coming with their own challenges and geopolitical choke points. Currently, that is based on the rare earth minerals needed to create batteries, solar panels, and more. China has effectively cornered the market on the extraction of these critical inputs and even more thoroughly captured the market on the refining of the raw materials into usable forms.
It's absolutely a global marketplace, and China isn't setting themselves up. They are the dominant player in the world, and this is from an industrial strategy that they have pursued for the better part of 20 to 25 years. It's been really interesting watching China over this period of time. For a long time, I would describe them in my energy policy class as a two-handed energy giant because they were simultaneously building more coal plants than you could shake a stick at, developing fossil fuels, and also at the very same time developing the world's largest and most resilient renewables market. Those rare earth metals are not just critical to renewable energy, they're actually critical to a massive amount of our computing, et cetera. It's a strategy that has played out and has multiple benefits for China.
All is not lost, though, as new sources of these materials are found and exploited. Also, these metals are not really all that rare. Actually, all of them are more abundant than gold. It's just rare to find them in large deposits that are economically viable to extract.
We keep finding new sources of lithium that change the world marketplace, but China has been very adept at locking in long-term contracts for cobalt, lithium, a whole range of these different kinds of minerals across the globe and ensuring either that they are getting the raw materials or alternately that the processing that those materials need are based in China and then therefore allow them to dominate the supply chains that come afterwards. That being said, China needs to sell to the world. And I think the other thing is it's very, very clear at this point in time that other countries have started to realize how important these minerals are and to develop a much stronger interest in thinking about how those markets function. And so it's not a challenge right now for us to do a lot with renewables. 2025 was the largest growth in renewables globally that we have ever seen. And it, by the way, blew out the 2023 projections by the International Energy Agency by something like 25%. So even from projections that were 2 years earlier, we built more. And that was during a year in which more countries sort of reversed themselves or stepped back, I should say, is a better way to characterize it, from subsidizing or supporting renewable energy.
So, what is behind this massive rise in the adoption of these new systems, despite the pulling back of international commitments to reducing carbon emissions and fewer global conversations centered on the dangers of climate change? It all comes down to costs and speed.
The simple fact of the matter is renewable energy right now is on the margin as generally the cheapest form of energy you can build. The only thing that comes close is natural gas combined cycle plants, but they have a 5-year run up oftentimes in terms of getting built. You can build solar fields in typically anywhere from a 9 to 18-month period of time, depending on where you're doing the siting and that sort of thing. And so when time is of the essence, renewables are winning there as well, at least solar. Wind, much more challenging, takes a longer time, a lot more stringent permitting, et cetera.
We see this play out in our diplomacy simulations with our high school students. There's a crisis where one country wants to build a dam on a shared river, which will lead to catastrophic economic impacts for their neighbor. Time and again, students turn to wind and solar projects to reduce time, costs, and impacts on these two countries. However, the need to diversify energy resources and produce more at home comes down to more than just the economics of it all. Energy security has been at the heart of national security since at least the Industrial Revolution. If you do not have sufficient energy resources to run your military, your economy, and other systems, that is a recipe for disaster.
It starts from this fundamental key assertion or reminder for the audience. Energy is the linchpin that drives the entire economy, period. Number one, if you're energy deficient in any way, it affects your actual national security, the operation of the Army, the Navy, and then every single component that we do in our nation's economy and in any nation's economy is focused on energy. And so it's absolutely critical to be thinking about energy security. And we arguably don't think about it, frankly, enough, in part because we have an embarrassment of riches in the United States. I characterize both Canada and the US as energy superpowers. in that they have an enormous amount of resources across every style and kind of energy. And that is actually in many ways due to government policies that went all the way back again to the 1970s and the oil crises we were seeing at that point in time. Those set the stage for a massive amount of work that the United States did developing a variety of new and emerging energy technologies. And the reason that matters for energy security and the reason that it mattered back then was it helped us diversify our dependence on the Middle East at that point in time was a massive level. We had not developed the resources or the technologies to be able to frack our own oil and gas, unearth the massive resources we have there. So that diversification of energy sources is critical. You don't want to be overly dependent on any one entity for your energy supplies. And the more you diversify in terms of whom you trade with, in terms of whom you interact with, in terms of the amount of energy sources that you have, and in terms of the amount of energy supply chains that you have, that's what brings you greater energy security. So it's diversifying the countries, diversifying the energy sources, diversifying the supply chains.
In light of all this, and all of the above energy strategy seems to make sense. The pursuit of all different forms of energy, from fossil fuels to renewables, nuclear, geothermal, and more, could further insulate the United States, and other countries who pursue this path, from the shocks that we continually see. Despite this, leaders in both parties pay lip service to this idea, while placing restrictions on their disfavored form of energy.
We've actually been pursuing policies that have been reducing that diversification, making ourselves more dependent. A critical example is our friends to the north. The largest trading partnership in the world is that occurs between the United States and Canada. And that includes $100 billion a year in energy that goes back and forth across the Canadian-US border. And unfortunately, Canadian-US relations have been undermined in the last year and a half to a degree. We have not seen Canadian-US relations as low as this, other than the 1812 war, when the two countries actually went to war against each other. And so that's really challenging. We trade hydroelectricity and oil and gas and a whole set of processing facilities, just massive amounts of energy that are moving back and forth. And we're dependent on that to some degree. And that relationship has been weakened. And many other countries in the world are now much more hesitant to trade with the US. And that's going to mean that our access to critical minerals is going to be more expensive. And the rest of the world, I think, seems to understand this. I think we've taken some steps back.
Of course, not every form of energy is equal, nor directly substitutable. Therefore, there is an extra step necessary to maximize the gains from this diversification, which is the total electrification of energy systems. As more of our infrastructure begins to rely on electricity, you can begin to swap various fuel sources when one gets too expensive. This is most relevant in our transportation systems, where vehicles only run on one fuel source, tying them into that single market. As more vehicles run on electricity, they can begin to rely on more fuel sources that produce that electricity.
So we have a gas hybrid car and one electric car. Boy, is the EV right now is looking awfully fine. We spend, I don't know, $10 a week on electricity, and my spouse commutes regularly to her work, 50 miles each way. And it's just amazing how little we're spending on gasoline right now.
With the electrification of all things, there's another area to consider, which is storage. The dominant liquid state battery remains the lithium-ion battery, which has served us well in many respects. However, the limitations on the storage capacity, the accessibility of lithium, the waste products, and more have inspired people to look at other ways to store energy long-term to maximize cost savings on production.
Storage is so exciting right now because everybody figured out, oh, you solve storage, you've solved the holy grail of renewables. You can build renewables pretty darn fast, get a fair amount of output from them, even in places with snow. Again, though, you still want to diversify your energy sources. But then as we're thinking about storage, it's just massive. So number one, a huge variety of different kinds of chemical variations are coming out. So You're right. It's not just lithium ion. There's emerging, interesting work being done with sodium, which is incredibly common. And if they get some of those battery systems up to scale at cost, you're moving away from your dependence on those rare earth metals. There's really interesting stuff being done right now with thermal storage. We have a unit here at the University of New Hampshire on the Durham campus that's a massive thermal storage container. So it basically takes excess heat from our steam systems and stores that heat and then releases it at times when we need it the most to help with a whole variety of areas.
For me, it is amazing the ingenuity that many of these researchers are taking when it comes to energy storage ideas. Some systems compress large quantities of gas in massive underground containers. They do this when energy is being produced and demand is low, leveraging and locking in the lower cost of production. When energy demand is high, the gases are used to spin turbines, producing energy at that lower cost that was locked in earlier. My favorite is a similar idea, but it is a system that lifts heavy weights into the air when energy is cheap and abundant, and lowers them to create new energy when demand is high. Think of it like a giant grandfather clock. Stephen seems to prefer the technology behind pumped hydropower.
Pump storage basically takes hydro storage, and you can take water, and at times when electricity isn't needed or is really, really cheap, you use the very, very cheap electricity to pump the storage up into a container or a reservoir up the mountain or whatever it happens to be. And then at 4 o'clock on the Friday afternoon, when things are blazing hot and you need tons and tons of air conditioning, you release it. And it's essentially free electricity at that point in time. You've paid for it during that cheap period.
Of course, these larger grid-scale systems will not help with batteries in your car, which remain bulky, heavy, and inefficient for their intended use. While no one has quite figured this out, there is interesting research being done on a number of solutions. This includes new solid-state batteries with different chemical and metallic inputs, dynamic magnetic charging. Think of this as specific lanes on the highway transferring energy to your car via magnetic waves as you drive, and simply increasing the amount of charging stations available in key areas. There's another reason unlocking further energy sources, storage systems, and infrastructure needs to take a central focus of our thinking in a way that maybe it has failed to at this point. As data centers pop up across the country to meet the growing demand of artificial intelligence systems, the amount of energy needed is skyrocketing. We have all seen the reports of communities that welcome the idea of new jobs and tax revenues that data centers promise, only to see their electric bills grow at unsustainable rates. There are many issues surrounding these data centers, including water usage, noise pollution, and others, but here we'll stay focused on the energy usage.
AI has enormous potential right now to do good for society and also to unleash all sorts of challenges and evils. And regulation and policy is really behind the times because AI is moving so quickly and so fast. The concern that I have is some of the uses and developments of AI technologies use extremely intensive, for instance, a lot of cryptocurrency is based on blockchain technology that uses massive amounts of electricity to develop the security coding for those cryptocurrencies. And that is driving prices for everybody. I am not sitting around thinking that we should be banning these activities, but what I do think is that we should be looking at utility regulation that differentiates between usage types. And when we've got players on our electricity markets that are so dominant or so large in nature that their operation can shift prices significantly, I think at that point in time, we want to make sure that they're being priced in a different way than the common regular user or consumer is. And there's lots of states that are paying attention to this right now and starting to develop those policies. It's just, we've been caught, things have changed so quickly.
There is a flip side to this all as well, as AI can be utilized to help hasten the energy transition, creating new opportunities, and speed up the development of new technologies.
But there are a lot of ways, I think, in which AI will be used to improve our operation of energy markets. For instance, AI is being used right now to improve our prediction of where many of those rare earth minerals may or may not be. Some of them are difficult to find, and there's all sorts of work in geology that AI is being used for right now to think about that approach.
So, taking all this into consideration, what are some of the things we need to keep an eye on as we continue to pursue, procure, and produce new energy resources, systems, and infrastructure?
The concerns and the challenges that we see as we think about what our energy systems of the future are going to look like are really going to be about what are the underlying regulatory challenges with any particular kind or source of energy, because every kind will have problems associated with it, even the ones that seem beneficial. And then for some of our larger, big energy systems, what are the vulnerabilities going to be when we're thinking about war or those pieces? We need large-scale baseload power. Then that typically translates into big electricity plants, very large concentrated utility scale solar, big hydro, nuclear plants, refineries, because we're talking large scale economies of scale. And those will be targets every single time, just as Chernobyl has become a renewed target for the Russians in Ukraine. We are going to see countries always needing to be very thoughtful about what their vulnerabilities are in terms of their large-scale energy superstructure. We will see an increased development of what we call distributed energy resources. So resources that you create in your home, solar on my rooftop. Maybe I'm tied into a local wind farm that's just 4 miles down the road. Microgrids, which cut you off from your dependence on the main grid. Those distributed energy systems are going to increase in scale and scope, but they won't replace a large-scale traditional big energy market. You need really, really large amounts of electricity being delivered to big cities. And there's just no way you're going to have enough distributed energy resources to take care of entire co-op or condo buildings or apartment buildings in New York City or Detroit or Chicago or Houston. And so we're still going to be dependent on transmission systems and big hydro and nuclear power, all of those things. Those will always be vulnerable targets.
Also, as we look ahead, the hope for the next big thing is always just over the horizon. What is the big energy idea being worked on right now that could unlock the future of energy security?
I'm not totally on top of this stuff, but there is really, really interesting advances being made right now in both fusion and hydrogen. And if they get solved or emerge, or if there's suddenly a kind of sideways discovery, something happens, we may, at that point in time, suddenly have our hands on a new emerging energy system that could be a game changer in ways that could really upend the industry.
For those who are not aware, the idea of nuclear fusion technology comes from the sun, where massive amounts of heat, gravity, and plasma all combine to create one of the most efficient and cleanest sources of energy. The problem here on Earth is that we have to currently pour massive amounts of energy into enormous electromagnets to do the work of the sun's gravity. If you've seen the Iron Man comics or movies, this is the basis for the technology behind the arc reactor that powers his suit. While steps have been made to move this technology forward, the idea of miniaturization is still nowhere close to a reality. At the end of the day, there are many ways we can move toward a better, more secure, and resilient energy system that reduces the power of countries that control the critical choke points in their various forms. However, the most practical steps you can take revolve around efficiency in your home, appliances, and vehicles.
The thing that most people should be thinking about is efficiency. You can buy 45 miles a gallon SUVs out there. Don't go buy an SUV that's 27 miles a gallon. It's ridiculous. And the same thing, if your house is poorly insulated and you know you're going to be there more than 4 years, insulate your home before you do anything else. You will save a ton of money.
While maybe not the coolest thing you can do or the most exciting, it can be the most personally powerful in your own efforts to feel you have some control of the crazy world we live in, where many times decisions made thousands of miles away challenge your wallet, your way of life, and the decisions made in your name by your very own government. Thank you for listening to this month's episode of The Global in the Granite State, a production of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. If If you haven't yet subscribed to get the latest updates to this program, do so now. In addition, we rely on the support of our generous community to make this program work. Please consider becoming a member or donating by visiting wacnh.org today. As always, Tim Horgan is the host, producer, director, audio engineer, sound designer, researcher, fact checker, and all-around support for this podcast. Our theme music remains Admin by A.A. Alto, and our interlude music is Energy by Joy and Sound. Until next time.